I'm Nikki Haley, and I'm running for president.
The former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations kicks off her presidential campaign. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Nikki Haley has officially announced her candidacy to become the next U.S. president. The former South Carolina governor says it's time for what she called generational change. She announced her bid by video on Tuesday at a rally on Wednesday. She again stressed the need for new leadership. Haley, who once said she wouldn't run against former U.S. President Donald Trump, who's also her former boss, is now the first Republican to challenge him since he announced his White House bid last November.
We're ready to move past the stale ideas and faded names of the past. And we are more than ready for a new generation to lead us into the future.
Meanwhile, President Biden may also be announcing his re-election plans soon. And as the 2024 presidential race gears up, who will enter the field next? Well, to help us answer those questions, let's bring in our guests right now. Joining us here in Washington, D.C. is Rina Shah. She is a political analyst and current affairs commentator. Also with us is Joseph Williams. He is a former senior editor for U.S. News and World Report. From New York, Ian Reifowitz is a professor of historical studies at SUNY Empire State College. And in the U.S. Capitol, Adolfo Franco is an attorney and Republican strategist. Welcome to all of you. Rina Shah, it's just under 2 years, 20 months to be more specific, to the next general election, but we already see the contenders are lining up. They are jockeying for pole position. And now we have the former South Carolina governor, Nikki Haley. She's announced her candidacy. She joins, of course, Donald Trump, as I just said. What do you make of her chances? I mean, can she muster support among the Republican base?
Well, Anand, regardless of what happens from today on out, she has made history as the first ever female governor, either former or current, to seek the nomination in a presidential primary. That is huge. In and of itself, I think Nikki Haley understands that she exited the ambassadorship she had to the United Nations on not so great of a note. She was in that ambassadorship for a year. She was governor of South Carolina for 6 years, and that is what she's known for. That announcement today in her home state, it's no surprise she was met with so much fanfare. There's a lot of love for her in that state. But to announce this early, when Trump is the only person in the field, I think her calculation had a few elements to it. First of all, she wanted to come out of the gate super early to fundraise. She wants to show that she can fundraise off of the Republicans that have nostalgia for the party of yesteryear. I think she also knows that this is a very different Republican Party today. The electorate is very different since Donald Trump was the standard bearer and remains so. So in her heart of hearts, I actually believe that she knows she can't win this nomination, but I think she'll be just fine being somebody's vice president. And then thirdly, there is a lot to unpack here about the future forward. She is trying to figure out who she is. In her announcement video yesterday, and even in her speech today in person, she painted herself as somebody who was different, yet still the same. It's a bit hypocritical, if you ask me, and I believe she's going to have to overcome that challenge. Though let's not forget, she is in this race now, and this is, of course, far sooner than Governor DeSantis, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and former Vice President Mike Pence. The latter of the two, I believe, she's very aligned with policy-wise. So she's out there, and this is her race, and it also shouldn't be missed that she is the first ever prominent Asian American woman to seek the Republican presidential nomination. That's also another historic first for her.
Adolfo Franco, in that announcement that Nikki Haley made, she made much of what she called the generational divide, implying that the party, the country needs new, younger leadership. Is that going to sell?
Well, I'm not sure it's going to sell, but it's always a good line. Always youth sells, and that everything Canada's going to try to do that. The distinction, obviously, with President Trump and more importantly with President Biden, who's 80 years old. That was an excellent analysis by Rina. I agree wholeheartedly that she's running for vice president. There's no question about that. That's what she's doing here. Notice in the speech, which I watched live, the entirety of it, there was absolutely no criticism of President Trump at all. And in fact, she made reference, of course, to her service, however briefly, with President Trump. And secondly, many of the lines in the speech and delivery could have been delivered by President Trump. So Rina's right. She's totally aligned. Youth is going to count for the vice presidency. You know, you never know in life. Anything could happen to President Trump between now and the primary season and the nomination. So she would be a serious contender. But I agree, she's a very attractive VP choice from whoever wins the nomination, and certainly I think would be on top of President Trump's list, having served in his administration in the first instance, and secondly, as Rina outlined, totally aligned with his policies. But I think you're going to see this by virtually all of the serious candidates for the Republican nomination, and I don't think Liz Cheney and those outliers are serious contenders. They will be very much aligned with President Trump. The trick is, why switch horses for the electorate as a whole, not for Washington insiders to say about electability. So that's going to be the trick for Nikki Haley. You saw it today. There were no distinctions between the announced candidate, President Trump, and herself on policy issues.
Adolfo, you know, as both you and Rina said, she aligns herself very much with former President Donald Trump. So is she going to frame this candidacy as, I'm Trump, but a lot younger?
Well, I think she's going to frame it on electability, the youth factor you mentioned, the broadening of the party. We'll see if Tim Scott announces, which everyone believes he is, Senator Scott, reaching out to minorities, to women, in her case particularly. So it's going to be, I'm Trump, but I can appeal to the broader voter. She made a passing reference in that speech today, which caught my attention, to say that our message is the right message, and our values are the right message, but we aren't reaching all of the voters. And I think that's a sort of not an attack on President Trump, but a distinction on Republicans to say, I'm the person you can elect with Trump-like policies without, if you will, some of the limitations President Trump or the negatives that President Trump would bring if he were the nominee.
Joseph Williams, a journalist on the Guardian newspaper, sent out a tweet about Haley's announcement. This is what the tweet said. I'll read it out. She said, Haley just vowed that in her America she would make voter ID the law of the land, institute term limits for Congress, and implement mental competency tests for politicians over 75. What do you make of that? Are these things that concern voters?
They should, mainly because what she's proposing probably wouldn't pass constitutional muster, especially not the part about cognitive tests for candidates over 75. But also, these are a lot of the same old tropes that we've heard from the Republican Party, and their imports. She wants to import nationally some of the things that happen in South Carolina and some of the things that the Republican Party stands for writ large. And I think one of the things that we're kind of overlooking here is that it seems, at least in some respects, that Nikki Haley had her moment in 2015, 2016, when she was very much directly opposed to Donald Trump. Not only was she directly opposed, she also more or less called him unfit for the presidency, but yet she agreed to serve in his term, in his cabinet rather, and is now sharply aligned with some policies that she said she pretty much abhorred back when she was running for South Carolina, and that has all changed. I mean, what a difference a couple of years make, in that she is now very much with the MAGA wing. What remains to be seen is if they're going to buy it. I mean, why go for the substitute when you can have the original, and why go for a watered-down version when the full proof is right at her shoulder? So it remains to be seen exactly what she'll bring to the table, along with this MAGA kind of stance, what kind of policy she'll have. Is she pro cutting Social Security? Will she hew to some of the other Republican platforms? We don't know, and we probably won't know for some time. But it does seem to me like her time may have come and gone, but she still is a fairly prominent figure on the national stage.
Joseph, do you agree, as we just heard, that she's perhaps running for vice president, not the top job?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say exactly what's in her mind. Certainly, that's a great fallback position for her. And, for many of the reasons I just outlined, it may be the case that she's running for vice president. I personally have a hard time seeing how she would actually win the nomination, but you don't run for second place. I mean, you run because you're going to win. You run because you expect to win. And certainly in her view, she does. I mean, given her announcement and all the things she's saying about what she will do as president, it's hard to imagine that she's actually going to settle for second place, although anything is possible.
Ian Reifowitz, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Well, you actually wrote the book on the circumstances, the conditions, the politics that paved the way for Donald Trump's election, but that was back in 2016. Has much changed? Will he still be a formidable candidate?
There's no question he will be a formidable candidate as long as he's not wearing an orange jumpsuit. So look, there are two spots. Assuming that doesn't happen, there are two spots in the Republican nomination process, Trump and not Trump. Right now, not Trump is named Ron DeSantis. I think Nikki Haley was smart to get into the race when she did, because now she is the only one in the race not named Trump. So if perhaps DeSantis were to stumble in some way, she can emerge as not Trump. Whether she criticizes him directly or not is another issue. I do think she's positioning herself most likely as a vice presidential nominee, to follow up on what some of the other folks have said. And to follow up on what Joseph said about her moment, I read an interesting column today by Stuart Stevens, who ran Mitt Romney's campaign, but is now a never Trump Republican, or maybe even a non-Republican. And he said, had Nikki Haley stuck to her 2015, 2016 guns and remained anti-Trump, she would be maybe would be perfectly positioned today as a candidate for 2024. But she didn't do that, and in that sense, I think that fits with what Joseph said, that she either missed her moment or missed her path, her potential path to a lane in the Republican nomination process all her own. Right now, I don't see that she has that lane.
Rina, let me get your take on that very quickly, what Ian just told us, that had she gone up against Trump, opposed all those policies that he was talking about, she would be perfectly positioned right now.
See, in my estimation, I think the Republican electorate has gone through something, and that something was the midterm elections of just this past fall. So I don't know that Republican voters want an anti-Trumper, but I also know that they don't want Trump entirely. I think they want somebody in between. And a governor, somebody who's an incumbent governor right now, like a Governor Ron DeSantis, is best situated to appeal to the Republican voter as we get closer to the election of 2024 for president. Because in the governorship, he can do actions every day that says, look, I'm doing something. So he's not just talking. He's not out there with a lot of bluster and just trying to appeal to their emotions. He's doing. So that's, I think, really going to have a heavy hand in this primary process. Mike Pence is going to enter, I believe. Mike Pompeo may enter. These people are all going to be considered establishment types by the people who are in the MAGA faction of the party. And they want nothing to do with establishment types. So they want somebody that, again, is able to really walk the line. I don't think that former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, is going to be best situated to do that. She's trying to do it right now, and it's not playing well. She would have been fine about 5 years ago, but today, not so much. That's why I believe she's auditioning for vice president, because she knows in her heart of hearts she can't seal this nomination for the Republicans in 2024.
Okay, Joseph Williams, President Biden has, of course, not formally announced that he's running for re-election, that if he indeed wants to seek a second term. But in his State of the Union address, we did get some indications of where he's heading. There was a common theme that ran through that speech. Let's listen to that common theme.
Well, let's finish the job. There's more to do. We got to finish the job. We've been sent here to finish the job, in my view.
So is that the president's way of telling us, I'm in the race again?
Absolutely. I mean, if you listen closely, you can hear the bumper stickers being printed as we speak. I think it was a not so tacit signal that he's going to run again. He's got a lot, depending on where you stand, he's got a lot to run on. but he's got a lot of headwinds to name the truth as well. Not only is his age a pretty big factor, the other factor is that people are just kind of dissatisfied, even though the indicators show that we should be feeling much better about where we are as a country. Poll after poll after poll says we are in a rotten mood, and we are blaming the guy in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for a lot of the problems. So he's trying to prop up his electoral prospects. You heard the speech today talking about how all the things that he's accomplished, because it seems that they're not getting through. So I think that factors into kind of a through line between Nikki Haley and Joe Biden, is that she is very much trying to make the case for turning the page, if not on Donald Trump, then certainly on Joe Biden, and presenting a fresher face, even if that fresher face is at the bottom of the ticket.
Ian, Joseph was talking there a moment ago about Biden's age. If Biden does indeed run, he will be 82 when in 2024. I mean, could his age work against him? I mean, one also has to note that if Trump gets the nomination on the Republican side, it will be a replay of 2020. That's something that the voting public in the United States is not looking forward to. In fact, there was an ABC poll which showed that almost 2/3 of voters in the country say they will be angry or dissatisfied if these were the two candidates. Trump himself will be 78 if he runs again. So does Nikki Haley make a good point when she talks about a generational divide?
I think she makes a good point for younger candidates in general. I'm not sure that she's, going to have that much of a chance to get that nomination. Look, I think you make a good point. If the nomination goes to Trump, then Biden's age is a complete non-factor. I don't think anybody's going to look at Biden at his age and say, well, Donald Trump, who's a couple of years younger, is somehow more physically fit or mentally fit for office because he's 78 as opposed to 82. It's not going to happen. But it's a different story if you're talking about a contrast between DeSantis and Biden. I think there's an issue there in the Republican primary process as well. Age is a factor if there's a contrast. I do think that Biden's State of the Union performance last week, or a week and a half ago, was pretty strong, more than pretty strong. The fact that he was able to parry on his feet and outduel some Republicans in the chamber demonstrated that he can handle the rough and tumble of a campaign. So at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be that big a factor. Ronald Reagan wasn't that much younger than Biden is now when he won re-election in 1984, and really a thumping landslide. And Biden's poll numbers have already improved significantly from the low point last August. If you keep an eye on the average of the polling, he's improved significantly by about 5 points in terms of his average approval rating going up, and the average disapproval is down by about 5 points. So that's a pretty nice bump in just a matter of months. The economy is going to continue to improve, so that's going to be a headwind for Biden. So I think he's looking reasonably strong as an incumbent going into the election 2 years from now.
Adolfo, that headwind that Ian talks about, the economy, Biden's already been talking about that, specifically the deficit. He tweeted, and this is what his tweet said. It said, Republicans on the Hill like to talk about the deficit. Well, if you add us their plans so far, they'll add $3 trillion to the debt. It's mostly going to rich folks and big pharma. My budget will reduce the deficit by $2 trillion. What's in the rest of theirs? Now, we know that the debt ceiling has already been reached. The congressional budget officers, the government will run out of money between July and September. And of course, we've just been hearing all these concerns about financing Social Security and Medicare. What is the Republican position on all of this?
Well, the Republican position is a simple one, and that's what you have when you have an incumbent and you run on the incumbent's record. Look, this is a Beltway conversation in large part. You heard a lot of Democrat talking points on here. I'm a Republican strategist and so forth. But just look what the American people say in the polls. And I frankly disagree with the guest, just basically saying the American people don't know how good they have it. The fact is, the vast majority of the country, 72%, think the country is going in the wrong direction. The vast majority of the country do want change in leadership. The majority of Democrats do not want Joe Biden to run for re-election. I'm just unpacking the facts here. You got 6.5% annual inflation. That's a fact. I have no idea. The guest said it's going to come down. I have no idea. If you have that crystal ball, I want you to be my financial advisor. You have no idea that's going to happen. So the situation in the country right now, he's perceived as a weak leader internationally. We haven't talked about the spy balloon. We haven't talked about Afghanistan. And lastly, and I have to say this with all due respect, age is just a number, but behavior isn't. So somebody suggests to me that even if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, that Donald Trump's cognitive abilities and ability to project energy, be able to speak without a teleprompter, be able to conduct himself in a way that, I'm sorry, President Biden has nowhere near that confidence of the American people that he's in charge. He is, to the majority of people, concerningly cognitively challenged. He's 80. President Reagan in 1974 was 72. There's a big difference in 8 years. Watch a tape of Joe Biden just 10 years ago and look at him today. So you have age, you have a poor record. They're not headwinds. There's no indication things are improving. And his approval rating continues to hover around the low 40s consistently. This isn't a record for re-election. This is a record for disaster, and most Democrats know it.
Okay, Ian, what's your response to that?
Well, Joe Biden just led his team to the best performance in the midterms by
losing the House? Losing the House of Representatives?
Yes, in the House of Representatives. Yes, in the House of Representatives, the best performance by a midterm since 1962. Those are numbers. You can compare them to any other first-term, best Democrat since 1962. And if you don't count George W. Bush, who we had the tragedy of 9/11, which gave his party a huge boost, it's the best performance of any party since 1962. So they're not going to change leaders when you have somebody who's done this well for his party. Nobody has a crystal ball, but inflation has dropped from 9.1% to 6.5%. It's going in the right direction.
What was it 2 years ago?
Inflation is going in the right direction. Unemployment is that, I believe, that we haven't seen since 1969, 3.4%. The economy is moving in the right direction. He has a very strong legislative record to run on. And if you look at what Republicans are talking about, taking Nikki Haley as an example, she didn't mention a single economic fact in the list of things we saw today from Anon.
She mentioned it. She mentioned inflation. You haven't talked about the border crisis this president has completely ignored.
Yeah.
You haven't talked about his fiasco in Afghanistan. You haven't talked that in 2020 he lost 14 House seats while getting the presidency.
Okay.
So he has a consistent losing record in the House of Representatives, not a winning record.
Okay, Ian, finish what you're saying. I'm going to move on. Go ahead.
Republicans want to play culture war. That's their choice. It's not going to play. They lost a handful of House seats, a tiny handful, compared to what every other president other than 2002 Bush has done in 60 years.
Yeah.
Yes, the House flipped, but it went from to the tiniest of Republican majorities. Talking about a flip of I believe 9 seats. The average performance is a 30 seat.
Okay.
Way ahead of.
Joseph, we heard a moment ago that unemployment is now at 3.4%. That is really low. And President Biden often touts the fact that there were 12 million jobs created during the first 2 years of his presidency. But he's also got nowhere on immigration or on gun safety, for that matter. I mean, now the Republicans control the House. Is he going to be able to get anything done?
In a word, no, except for judges. So that's probably the exception. I mean, all of those are legitimate points. All of them also point to the fractured nature of our politics right now. There's very little cooperation, very little incentive for Republicans to cooperate with President Biden in the House. The Senate can get stuff done, but not any major packages, because you need some votes in the House to do it. And talking about economic proposals, we haven't really heard much from Republicans writ large about what they would do if and when we gave them control of the economy. So I think that's a very real point that Democrats have to make. They can run on a record. The mood of the public is sour, but statistics don't lie. And statistics are something that he can point to at the very least and talk about how well his administration has been able to get things done. Now, the border crisis, it depends on who's in office. I mean, we had roughly the same number of people trying to cross the border. It spiked, and the only reason why it went down is because President Trump decided that he wanted to not open the border or keep the border sealed because of COVID-19, and a lot of people felt like that was not that was basically a fig leaf. So we have a lot of persistent problems that we've not been able to to attack, no matter who's been in office. So I think that those are kind of issues that will get hashed out on the campaign trail. But I think Biden does have a decent record to run on, and it does depend on where you stand.
Rina, I know that you are no Trump supporter, but what would you like to see in a future Republican candidate? I mean, you were talking a moment ago about Ron DeSantis. He certainly has a lot of appeal in Florida. Does he have national appeal?
I certainly think Governor DeSantis has national appeal, but I also think that the primary process is such that if it turns out to be a very crowded field, certainly the most extreme candidate will emerge. And that's what we saw when Trump ran. We saw a very crowded field of Republican establishment types that were essentially saying the same thing, the inside the Beltway talk. People are frustrated. People don't want another Biden and Trump matchup. They are far too old. These gentlemen belong in retirement homes, enjoying their life with their grandkids. They don't need to be governing the country. If you're too old where you can't govern yourself, you shouldn't be governing the country. And that's why I'm glad Senator Dianne Feinstein of California has finally announced her resignation. Look, if you talk to millennials like me who have young families, and we're seeing eggs on the shelf be $10 here in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, that tells you there is something really wrong here. And our leaders are asleep at the wheel, because every day that goes by that someone like Nikki Haley takes the podium and does the us versus them talk and talks about socialism, but doesn't talk about kitchen table issues like crime and public safety and our children getting better in American schools. I had to pull my kids out of public school. I mean, I pay so much in taxes, and my kids are in failing public schools in one of the best areas in the country. Why am I having to do that? It's because people are beholden to the unions, and people are not talking about what's going to serve all of us. They're talking about what's going to serve some of us. So look, I liked some parts of what Biden had to say in the State of the Union, but again, it's just politicians talking. He's talking about pharmaceutical prices. He's talking about junk fees. That's all fodder for young people like me. Where's the talk across the spectrum about, again, who's going to solve the most pressing issues of the day? Crime, education, economy, immigration. These are all issues where Republicans are poised to lead, but who's going to do it? I'm seeing Governor DeSantis best poised to do it right now. But again, I'm open to anybody coming and talking directly to me and young American families, because we are the future of this country.
Okay, Adolfo, I got 20 seconds. What's your view on Ron DeSantis?
Well, I like him very much, but I would remind Rina herself earlier in the program saying that the Republican Party has been transformed and does not want establishment types. Donald Trump was president. I guess he's technically the establishment, but he's not. And Ron DeSantis, who I know well and like him very much, is the establishment. That's the challenge.
Okay, and we need to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thank you for watching.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global business, only on CGTN.